Very good evening, you all. Welcome back to CUET PG Malviya Academy. I hope you all are doing great. So today in this class, we are going to know the romantic criticism. So far, we have discussed classical criticism. We have started from Greek authors like Plato and Aristotle. We covered romances, romantic critics like Longinus, Horace, and Quintilian. We also got to know about English critics like Philip Sidney, who is there in Elizabethan period. And then we moved to know neoclassical criticism. And in neoclassical criticism, you got to know important literary critiques of 18th century or the latter part of the 17th century, who are John Dryden. John Dryden, who is an influential literary critic in 17th century in Restoration age. And you all know Alexander Pope, who was there in 18th century in Augustan age, and Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was there in the age of sensibility, who has written the lives of the poets, okay, and there he has discussed about 52 poets. In Alexander Pope's writing, we have discussed The Rape of the Lock, an essay on criticism, Dunciad, and major important critical works. You all know John Dryden has written an essay on dramatic monologue and preface to fables. And in this class, we are going to know about important critiques of romantic age. So make me sure I'm audible and visible both to you. Do you have any question? जल्दी जल्दी बताइए. Do you have any problem, any technical glitch? Is my voice clear to you? Is everything okay? Are you there, student? Are you there? So, okay, let's discuss romantic criticism. The important critique, make me sure first you can hear me very clearly and my voice is clear. I'm clearly audible to you all. Make me sure, can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me? Are you there? So, do you have any question regarding previous classes? You all know that there is limited time for your upcoming exam of CUET PG English, and Malviya Academy already has launched a crash course where I'll be teaching you for upcoming 60 days. I'll make you prepare for the upcoming exam. I'll teach you important facts, okay? Then let's discuss romantic age. The most important writer, the most important critique of romantic period is William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, you all know, he has written very popular poem entitled as The Daffodils, and I hope you all have gone through the particular poem, The Daffodils, which is very important poem, very popular poem, and he has also written many important critical works. Here we will be studying William Wordsworth in the context of critiques, okay? We will be studying his important critical works. And if you have gone through British literature, if you have studied British literature, then you must have read William Wordsworth as a poet. He has written many important works. William Wordsworth, who is an important literary critique, romantic literary critique, and he is closely associated with for writing a very important critical work entitled as Lyrical Ballads. You must know he along with Samuel Taylor Coleridge has written lyrical ballads. मैम CUET PG केमिस्ट्री की क्लास अवेलेबल नहीं है बेटा. मालवी एकेडमी, I will let you know in the next class. I am also not sure about this. You can talk to the helpline number, ठीक है? There you can get the notification and there you can get the important queries of yours get sorted out. Although I was discussing William Wordsworth as an important critique, I told you we will be studying, we will be knowing about William Wordsworth as an important critique, not as an important poet. And as an important poet, we will be knowing about him in the upcoming class, okay, whenever I will be teaching you British literature. So important work of William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge you need to remember is Lyrical Ballads. Can you tell me in which year William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge has written Lyrical Ballads? You must remember the year 1798. Here in the context of literary criticism, you need to remember that William Wordsworth has written preface to Lyrical Ballads. Okay, he has written preface to Lyrical Ballads in the year 1800, and this particular title was directly asked in your examination. You should be very clear about this critical work written by William Wordsworth. He has written this particular work in the year 1800 entitled as Preface to Lyrical Ballad. In this work, Wordsworth issued his famous proclamation about the nature of poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. As you all know, in literary criticism, we get to know about important notions of the critics and we apply those notions to judge a particular work of art. For example, if you are familiar with the idea of Plato, if you have attended last classes where I have discussed about the art of poetry, how Plato has discussed that the art or any artistic expression or in the context of poetry, how it is twice or thrice removed from the reality. There Plato has given this idea in the work entitled The Republic, and you know the Republic is written into 10 chapters. The idea of Plato is totally different from the idea of Philip Sidney, because somewhere after Plato, you must be familiar with the idea of Aristotle, who has given the idea of many ideas. Somewhere he agrees at some point of time with the ideas of Plato, but sometimes he contrasts the ideas of Plato by saying that in poetry the theme of universal context, or you can say that universal elements are there in the poetry. That is why poetry is more celebrated language, more important language than any other language. And you all have seen in the last classes that the ideas of literary critiques in each and every period are different. So here in the context of William Wordsworth, we will be studying that the very important notion about poetry, William Wordsworth has given the idea that how poetry should be written, how a poet should write, and how a good poetry should be written. He states that poetry is an important literary form of literature, and it is written after a spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion. What poetry is, according to Wordsworth, it is a spontaneous, it is a natural overflow of your emotion and feelings, your intense emotions, your powerful emotions. He states that poetic would be considered as expressive rather than mimetic art. Poetry is not mimetic art, but it is an artistic art. Okay, it is considered as an expressive art. You know, theory of mimesis is given by Plato, where Plato states that poetry is away from the reality. That is why poetry does not show anything about real surroundings or real society. But here William Wordsworth says that poetic should be considered as an expressive art. It should be considered as an expressive artistic expression. It cannot be mimesis in the nature. And you should remember for your upcoming exam the basic important fact regarding William Wordsworth, that he has written the preface to fables. Okay, sorry, the preface to lyrical ballads. The preface to lyrical ballads he has written in the year 1800. The preface to lyrical ballad was written to explain the theory of poetry guiding Wordsworth's composition of the poems. The main idea of writing, the main purpose of this particular work, Preface to Lyrical Ballad, was to know the art of poetry. All right. Very good evening, Madhu. Very good evening, you all. I hope my points are clear to you. So far we discussed Wordsworth, his important critical work and his important critical idea. You must be very clear that William Wordsworth has written Preface to Lyrical Ballads, and in the Preface to Lyrical Ballads he has given the art of poetry and how poetry should be written, how a poet should write, and what are the important characteristics of a good poetry. According to William Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion, and this line was directly asked in your examination. So be very clear. He states famous quote, as this quote was asked in several exams of English literature. This quote was also asked in CUET MA English exam. What is a poet? The major question, the most important question William Wordsworth raises in the Preface to Lyrical Ballad is that what is a poet? According to William Wordsworth, poet is a man speaking to man. A man, it is endowed with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, and who has a greater knowledge of human nature and a more comprehensive soul than are supposed to be common among a mankind. The poet binds together, very important fact, that the poet binds together by passion and knowledge the vast empire of the human society. And that is why he states that poetry is the image of man and nature. And this line was asked in your CUET MA English exam, according to which literary critic poetry is the image of man and nature. You know, William Wordsworth is the most celebrated poet of Romantic age, and in Romantic period, Romantic writings are characterized by using the elements of nature, love and natural surroundings. So, according to William Wordsworth, poetry reflects the images of nature and society. That is why it is an expressive art. It is an example of expressive art. Is my point clear to you? Are you getting the idea of William Wordsworth? Can you hear me, students? All right, okay. Next, you should remember that next important line which was asked in UGC NET examination, that poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is countenance of all science. And this line was also asked in your examination, that which critic has stated that poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. You must be very clear. William Wordsworth Wordsworth had stated this line in the preface to Lyrical Ballad, that poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is the countenance of all science. He also states further that poetry is the first and last of all knowledge. It is immortal as the heart of man. These lines are really very significant for your upcoming exam, because if you have gone through previous year papers, you must be very clear that these lines are directly asked in your examination. So you should write down these important lines. You should be very clear, and these lines will be there in your exam. Poetry is the first and last of all knowledge. This is the line by Wordsworth. Then you should remember, poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. And poetry binds together passion, like a poet having passion and knowledge both. And poetry is a spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion. This is an important line said in the preface to Lyrical Ballad. This is very, very popular line, that the spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion is known as poetry. Poetry should be a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. It should come naturally. It should show your intense emotions, your intense feelings. I hope you are clear with Wordsworth. Now let's know. So far we discussed Wordsworth. You need to know that important points we discussed. Preface to Lyrical Ballads. Written in the year 1798. Okay. Preface to Lyrical Ballad, 1798. Then you should remember that he has given this particular line. It is the spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion. And what other critics have told about about William Wordsworth, this is also very important. So Matthew Arnold, who is an important critic in Victorian age, according to Matthew Arnold, Wordsworth himself was a great critic, and it is to be sincerely regretted that he has not left us more criticism. Although this line is not of that much importance, we will get to know important critical notions of other critics which can be asked in your examination. You should remember that Matthew Arnold referred Wordsworth as he is not fully recognized at home, he is not recognized at all abroad, yet I firmly believe that the poetic poem of Wordsworth is after that of Shakespeare and Milton. Matthew Arnold, an important Victorian playwright, an important Victorian poet and critic, compared the writings of Wordsworth to those greatest writers, playwrights like Shakespeare and John Milton. You know, Shakespeare is considered as the national poet of England and he has written wonderful dramas. John Milton, who has written The Paradise Lost, and The Paradise Lost is considered as an important epic poem. So undoubtedly most considerable in our language, this is the important notion of Matthew Arnold. See, this notion was asked. These notions which I am telling you today in this class will be directly asked to you. You will be asked who has called William Wordsworth as egoistic sublime. So you need to be very clear. John Keats, who is an important poet in Romantic period, he has called William Wordsworth as egoistic sublime. Lord Alfred Tennyson called Wordsworth as he has uttered nothing base, and Robert Browning, an important Victorian poet, he told about Wordsworth that Wordsworth is a moral eunuch. Okay, these important phrases you must keep in your mind. Are you getting my point? These phrases should be clear in your mind that John Keats called William Wordsworth as egoistic sublime. Alfred Lord Tennyson called Wordsworth as he has nothing uttered base, and Browning called Wordsworth as moral eunuch. Is my point clear? That's no other what other critics have stated. P.V. Shelley, another very important critic of Romantic age, criticized Wordsworth by saying simple and dull. Thomas Hardy states that William Wordsworth has a deep influence on Thomas Hardy, and according to the Leech Gatherer, you know, the Leech Gatherer is very important poem by William Wordsworth. Thomas Hardy was influenced from this poem and he has written he has taken the title, and William Hazlitt, you know, according to Thomas Hardy, the Leech Gatherer is considered as the best poem written by Wordsworth. William Hazlitt, who is an important essayist, states that Wordsworth was not a truly great poet and the spoiled child of disappointment. Important criticism you need to remember, important critical notion of William Wordsworth you need to remember. Also you need to remember the year of that particular work, that is 1800. I hope आपको William Wordsworth समझ में आ गया. Now we will be knowing about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, another very important writer from Romantic age. Is Wordsworth clear to you all? Are you getting this? Is it clear? Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was born in the year 1772 and died in the year 1834, His major critical work is Biographia Literaria, and the complete title you need to remember. The complete title of Biographia Literaria is Biographical Sketches of My Life and Opinions. He has written this work in the year 1817. 1817 में सैमुअल टेलर कॉलरीज ने लिखा है बायोग्राफिया लिटरेरिया, जिसका कंप्लीट टाइटल है बायोग्राफिकल स्केचेस ऑफ माय लिटरेरी लाइफ एंड ओपिनियन, एंड दिस इज एन ऑटोबायोग्राफी इन डिस्कोर्स बाय कॉलरीज which was published in 1817 into 2 volumes, and it contains 23 chapters. The work grew to a literary autobiography, including together many facts concerning his education and studies and his literary adventures, and explained in the preface to Lyrical Ballad and statements of Coleridge's philosophical views. Here, 2 points you need to keep in your mind, which are very important for your upcoming exam. The first point is that Samuel Taylor Coleridge has written Biographia Literaria in the year 1817, and this work is considered as an autobiographical work. अगर आपसे एग्जाम में ये क्वेश्चन पूछा जाता है कि कॉलरीज का कौन सा वर्क ऑटोबायोग्राफिकल वर्क है, you must remember Biographia Literaria. You should also remember the complete title of this work, that is Biographical Sketches of My Literary Life and Opinions, and he has written in the year 1817. He has propounded many important terms. For example, in the chapters 14, he has given willing suspension of disbelief. Let's know what willing suspension of disbelief is, and this term was asked for several times in your examination. Students, you should be very clear. The term willing suspension of disbelief was coined by Samuel Taylor Coleridge in the work entitled as Biographia Literaria, which was written in the year 1817. What is willing suspension of disbelief? When you go to the circus, as the title of this term itself suggesting, it is the suspension of disbelief. It is the suspension of your logic, of your intellect accordingly. When you are going to any circus, you must have been circus, you have watched those activities like वो मौत का कुआं और वो रैश ड्राइविंग और बहुत सारे ऐसे एक्टिविटीज वहां दिखाए जाते हैं जो रियल लाइफ में बिल्कुल भी पॉसिबल नहीं है. तो जब आपके लॉजिक को, जब आपके रीजन को, जब आपके प्रैक्टिकलिटी को आपके मीन्स आपके अकॉर्डिंग टू यू deliberately suspend किया जाता है for the sake of entertainment, for the sake of enjoyment, that is known as willing suspension of disbelief. Willing suspension of disbelief, this term is coined by Coleridge in the year 1817, and it means suspending one's own critical faculties and believe the unbelievable, or sacrifice of realism and logic for the sake of enjoyment. Willing suspension of disbelief का मतलब होता है suspending your critical idea, your belief, your critical faculties to understand, to believe on unbelievable things for the sake of entertainment, for the sake of enjoyment. And the best example is that watching circus. Willing suspension of disbelief समझ में आया आप लोगों को? Is this clear? Willing suspension of disbelief समझ में आया? Do you have any question? Clear? Okay, all right. Apart from willing suspension of disbelief, Samuel Taylor Coleridge has also given the idea of fancy and imagination. Very important, it was asked in your examination as well. Who has given the idea of fancy and imagination? You should remember the name Samuel Taylor Coleridge. According to Coleridge, imagination is of two types: primary imagination and secondary imagination. प्राइमरी इमेजिनेशन का मतलब होता है कि जो हमारे बॉडी में, ह्यूमन माइंड्स में जो नेचुरली प्रेजेंट है. अकॉर्डिंग टू सैमुअल टेलर कॉलेरिज, anyone can possess primary imagination, but for secondary imagination is basically a skill, or you can say a kind of quality which can be acquired by hard labors, by hard works. So the definition of primary, secondary and fancy, the imagination and fancy, you must be clear. Fancy and imagination. You must keep in your mind, right? Primary imagination का मतलब है, according to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, imagination having three parts: primary imagination, secondary imagination and fancy. Primary imagination is the power of receiving impressions of the external world through senses. It is perceiving the object of sense both in their part and as whole. The primary imagination is universal in nature. The most important key word you should remember that the primary imagination is universal in nature. Anyone can possess primary imagination, but secondary imagination can be acquired only by efforts, hard works, your skill, your critical qualities. Secondary imagination may be possessed by others, but it is peculiar, it is distinctive, it is not natural. Okay? Important keywords you should remember in the context of primary imagination. You need to be very clear. It is natural, and secondary imagination is distinctive. It is peculiar in nature. Is my point clear? Is my point clear? So in the context of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, you need to remember willing suspension of disbelief. First of all, you need to remember that Samuel Taylor Coleridge is an important literary critic from Romantic period. He has written Biographia Literaria, which has complete title Biographical Sketches of the Writer, and Biographia Literaria is an autobiographical work in which he has given two important critical notions: the notion of willing suspension of disbelief, and then you should remember he has given primary imagination, the idea of primary imagination and secondary imagination. He has also given the idea of fancy. Then you should remember that according to Coleridge, he has also given a term 𝐸𝐴𝑚 plastic, and 𝐸𝐴𝑚 plastic का जो मतलब होता है वो होता है power of poetic imagination. The power of poetic imagination is known as 𝐸𝐴𝑚 plastic in the words of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Let's know what Samuel Taylor Coleridge has stated about primary imagination and secondary imagination. These are the definitions given by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. वैसे आपके एग्जाम में ये definitions डायरेक्टली नहीं पूछे जाएंगे, आपको इजी वर्ड्स में याद रखना है, जो इजी टर्मिनोलॉजी है कि प्राइमरी इमेजिनेशन नेचुरल होता है और सेकेंडरी इमेजिनेशन को हार्ड एफर्ट्स के थ्रू हम अक्वायर कर सकते हैं. प्राइमरी इमेजिनेशन आई होल्ड टू बी लिविंग पावर एंड प्राइम एजेंट ऑफ ऑल ह्यूमन परसेप्शन and as a repetition in the finite mind of eternal art of creation in the infinite I am. This is what he states about primary imagination, that it can be possessed naturally by everyone. But what is about secondary imagination? He states that the secondary imagination I consider as an echo of the former primary imagination, that is coexisting with the conscious, will yet still as an identical in primary in the kind of its agency and differing only in degree, and in the mode of operation it dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate, or where this process rendered impossible. It means to say in simple words, secondary imagination is not natural in nature, it is peculiar, it is distinctive art, and it can be acquired by hard efforts. And the term which is very important, which is very significant, this term is given by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, isim-plastic, which means power of imagination. I hope बेटा आपको Wordsworth और Coleridge दोनों समझ में आ गए. Are you clear? टी.एस. इलियट ने कहा है सैमुअल टेलर कॉलरिज के बारे में, अकॉर्डिंग टू टी.एस. इलियट, perhaps the greatest of English critics and in a sense that last. And this line was asked in your examination. Which literary critic states about Samuel Taylor Coleridge that he is the greatest, perhaps he is the greatest English critic and perhaps the last. So you must remember the name T.S. Eliot. Charles Lamb, who is very famous writer. Can you tell me which essay of Charles Lamb is famous? For which essay Charles Lamb is popular? And that particular essay was asked in your examination as well. बताइए. Very good, Riya. Essay of failure. Charles Lamb, who is an important essayist, he called Coleridge as a damaged archangel. And this phrase is also important. This phrase also you must keep in your mind. So we have discussed William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Let's discuss P.B. Shelley, another important critique of Romantic age. Then we will be discussing Victorian novelists like Matthew Arnold. Are you clear, or do you have any question regarding Wordsworth and Coleridge? Do you have any question regarding Wordsworth and Coleridge? Any question, Riya? Have you gone through previous year papers? Riya, are you solving previous year papers? And what about you, Anjali? Okay, so let's know about P.B. Shelley, another important critique from literary criticism from Romantic age. His lifespan is from 1792 to 1822. Although P.B. Shelley has written many important works. By the way, can you tell me important works of Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge? What are major poems of Wordsworth? Riya, what are major works of Wordsworth? first of all, you should remember lyrical ballads. Although I am not teaching you Wordsworth as a poet here in this class, but since Wordsworth is very significant author in English literature, and every time in your examination question, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? All right, okay. So I was talking about Wordsworth. क्योंकि Wordsworth से हमेशा एग्जाम में क्वेश्चन पूछा जाता है, so you need to be very familiar with the works of Wordsworth. He and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, both of them has written lyrical ballads in the year 1798, and it is a collaborative work. Then he has written preface to lyrical ballad. (1800). अमन पांडे मैम, आप इतना अच्छा पढ़ाती हैं. Oh shit, I thought that you are asking any question. मालवी एकेडमी भी बड़ा प्लेटफॉर्म है अमन. इफ यू डोंट नो अबाउट दिस एकेडमी, यू मस्ट गो थ्रू द हिस्ट्री. और ये कहाँ से बच्चे आ जाते हैं क्लास में? Like you know that there is very limited time for your exam, and you are writing, you are suggesting me. Just care of the subject even, just value the subject. You all are student of English literature, and literature students should be considered very sincere. पढ़ाई पर फोकस कर लो बच्चा. Wordsworth के major works कौन कौन से हैं? I was talking about, and I asked you this particular work, right? Lyrical ballads, which is very important work, and then preface to lyrical ballad, and you all know the prelude, which is considered as an important autobiographical work. ऑटोबायोग्राफिकल वर्क कौन कौन से हैं? If you will be asked this, you must be very clear about the prelude. It is considered as an autobiographical work written by Wordsworth. Then you should remember important poems like Daffodils. You all know. What are other important poems, students? Tintern Abbey. Then you should remember Lucy poems by Wordsworth. The Leech Gatherer. So I'm just asking these questions because you need to be very familiar with the major works of William Wordsworth, and these works, these titles should be there in your mind. And in the context of criticism, you need to remember that he has written preface to lyrical ballad, where he has stated that poetry should be spontaneous in nature. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion. All right, and let's talk about Samuel Taylor Coleridge. We already discussed Samuel Taylor Coleridge as an important writer, as an important critic who has written Biographia Literaria, who has given the concept of primary imagination, secondary imagination, and fancy. He has also given the concept of willing suspension of disbelief, right? Now let's know about P.B. Shelley, another very important romantic writer. Am I not audible clearly? Can you not hear me? Yes, student, can you not hear me? Am I not clearly audible? Okay, so let's discuss about P.B. Shelley. The most important work of P.B. Shelley you need to remember is a defense of poetry. He has written a defense of poetry in the year 1821, but this particular work was published after his death in the year 1840, and it contains Shelley's famous claim that poets are the unacknowledged legislature of the world. This is very important line asked in your examination. If you will be asked according to which poets are considered as the unacknowledged legislature of the world, your answer should be P.B. Shelley. For Shelley, poets are not only authors of language and music, of the dance and architecture and statuary or painting, but they the institutors of the law and founders of civil society. Very important line, you should remember that according to P.B. Shelley, poets are the creator of the civil society, and poet is a nightingale. He has compared poets to the nightingales, that poets are nightingales who sits in darkness and cheer its own solitude with sweet sound. So in this class, you got to know three important major romantic critics: William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and P.B. Shelley. You got to know the work of William Wordsworth, preface to lyrical ballad, written in the year 1800, where he has talked about the art of poetry, how a poet should write poetry, what are important characteristics of poetry, and he states very popular line that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of the powerful emotion. Then we got to know the work of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, where Samuel Taylor Coleridge talks about fancy and imagination. According to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, imagination has two types: primary imagination and secondary imagination. Coleridge says that primary imagination is natural, it can be possessed by everyone, but secondary imagination is peculiar, it is distinctive, it can be acquired by hard works only. Then you got to know the specific term iconoclastic, which Coleridge has used for the power of the imagination, right? Then you should be very familiar with the important work of P.B. Shelley. He has written a defense of poetry, which is regarded as an important critical writing of literature in the field of literary criticism. I hope आपको romantic criticism समझ में आ गया है. In the next class, we will get to know Victorian critique, and the most importantly, we will get to know the important concept of T.S. Eliot, who is the most celebrated poet and critique of the modern period. Is it fine? Is this clear? Do you want to ask any question? Any query? If you have any question, then you can ask me, otherwise I'll end this session. All right, so see you all in the next session. Bye, take care. Thank you, students.